The chilly Boston air carried the scent of autumn leaves as Dr. Lauren walked through the hospital corridors, her mind focused on her latest breakthrough in embryology research. That was until she quite literally bumped into him, the man who would change her life forever. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, scrambling to pick up her scattered papers. Looking up, she found herself staring into the warmest brown eyes she'd ever seen. The owner of those eyes, Mr. Thompson, wasn't just any businessman. He was the founder of one of the city's most successful tech companies. Their chance encounter turned into coffee, which turned into dinner, which blossomed into the kind of romance people write stories about. Lauren found herself falling for his genuine curiosity about her work, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about innovation, and how he'd bring her favorite mint chocolate chip ice cream during her late-night research sessions. The city's social circles buzzed with excitement about their relationship. Here was the brilliant doctor who was revolutionizing fertility treatments, dating the self-made tech genius who'd built his empire from a tiny startup in his garage. They complemented each other perfectly, her calm wisdom balancing his enthusiastic energy. Their engagement party at his waterfront mansion was like something out of a dream. Fairy lights twinkled in the gardens, reflecting off the harbor waters. Lauren wore a silk dress that caught the evening breeze, while he looked dashing in his tailored suit. Friends and family raised their glasses to toast the perfect couple, and Lauren felt her heart could burst with happiness. But dreams have a way of showing their cracks when reality seeps in. It started small. He began missing their regular lunch dates, citing back-to-back meetings. Their evening walks along the harbor became rarer as he spent more time at the office. Lauren tried to understand, knowing how demanding his work could be. One evening, as they sat on his penthouse balcony watching the sunset, Lauren shared her dreams of having a big family. She painted a picture of their future, a home filled with children's laughter, family game nights, and holiday celebrations bursting with joy. She noticed how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he listened. The following weeks brought more subtle changes. He grew quieter during their dinner conversations, especially when she mentioned their upcoming wedding plans. His usual warm hugs became brief and mechanical. Something had shifted, but Lauren couldn't put her finger on what exactly had changed. Their last happy moment together was at a charity gala. He'd pulled her onto the dance floor, twirling her under the crystal chandeliers as the orchestra played. For a brief moment, she saw that familiar spark in his eyes, the one that had made her fall in love with him. If only she'd known it would be their last dance. Looking back, Lauren would remember these early days with a mixture of sweetness and sadness. The way he'd bring her coffee exactly how she liked it, 2 sugars and a splash of almond milk. How they'd spend Sunday mornings reading the newspaper together, sharing sections and discussing articles. The plans they'd made for their future home, right down to the color of the kitchen cabinets. But sometimes the most beautiful beginnings lead to unexpected endings. And as Lauren would soon discover, fate had a very different plan in store for her than the one she'd imagined on all those starlit evenings by the harbor. The morning everything fell apart started just like any other. Lauren was at her clinic, reviewing patient files and humming the song from their first dance. The wedding was just 2 days away, and her dress hung perfectly pressed in her closet at home. That's when her phone buzzed with an email notification. She nearly dropped her coffee cup as she read the message. The words blurred before her eyes, but their meaning was crystal clear. He wasn't going to marry her. Just like that, through a cold email, he ended their 2-year relationship. His reason? Our life goals don't align. Those 5 words echoed in her head like a cruel joke. The next few hours passed in a daze. Her assistant found her sitting in her office, still staring at her phone. "Dr. Lauren? The Richardson consultation is in 5 minutes. The concern in her assistant's voice brought her back to reality. Somehow, she managed to pull herself together enough to get through her appointments, though she couldn't remember a single word she said to her patients that day. The true pain hit when she returned to her apartment that evening. Wedding gifts were stacked neatly in one corner. Their engagement photos smiled down at her from the walls. The sight of his coffee mug in her kitchen, the one with the silly tech joke he loved so much, finally broke her. She slid down against the kitchen counter and let the tears flow freely. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from concerned friends and family. The news had spread like wildfire through Boston's social circles. She couldn't bear to read them, couldn't stand the thought of their pity. Instead, she sat in her dark kitchen, remembering how just last week they'd been planning their honeymoon. The next morning, she discovered the real reason behind his sudden change of heart. His business partner's wife, who had always been kind to Lauren, called with the truth. He had been overheard at their club, telling friends he couldn't risk having children who might claim his fortune. The woman he promised to spend his life with had become a potential threat to his wealth. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that they had already started fertility treatments together. Lauren had been so excited about starting a family that they'd visited her own clinic months ago. They had preserved genetic material, planning to try for a baby soon after the wedding. Now those dreams lay shattered, along with her heart. The following weeks were a blur of cancelled wedding arrangements and returned gifts. Lauren threw herself into her work, spending long hours at the clinic. Her colleagues whispered worriedly among themselves as they watched their usually cheerful doctor transform into a quiet, focused shadow of herself. But beneath her professional exterior, Lauren was grappling with a secret decision. The preserved genetic material from their fertility treatments was still viable. As she sat in her office late one night, staring at the file, a plan began to form in her mind. She had a choice to make, one that would change not just her life, but the lives of others forever. The betrayal had broken something in her, yes, but it had also awakened a determination she didn't know she possessed. As she drove home that night, watching the city lights reflect off the harbor waters where they'd once walked together, Lauren made her decision. He had taken away her dream of a perfect marriage, but she wouldn't let him take away her dream of having a family. Looking back, she would remember this period as the end of her innocence, but also the beginning of her strength. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead us to our greatest transformations. And as Lauren would soon discover, life had a way of offering second chances, just not in the way she'd expected. The Seattle rain tapped gently against the window as Lauren unpacked boxes in her new apartment. 6 months had passed since the broken engagement, and the fresh start she desperately needed was finally happening. The view of the Space Needle from her living room window reminded her just how far she'd come from Boston's familiar harbor. Her hand rested unconsciously on her growing belly as she arranged medical textbooks on the shelf. The fertility treatment had been successful, more successful than she could have imagined. The doctor's words still rang in her ears. "Congratulations, you're having quadruplets." She'd laughed and cried at the same time, wondering if the universe had a sense of humor. Setting up her new fertility clinic took most of her energy during the day. She'd found a perfect location near the hospital district, and her reputation had preceded her. Several local doctors had already reached out, eager to collaborate with the renowned specialist from Boston. Between preparing the clinic and preparing for 4 babies, Lauren barely had time to think about the past. But late at night, when the city lights twinkled through the rain, she would sit in her rocking chair and talk to her unborn children. "You're going to have the most amazing life," she'd whisper, imagining their future together. She had already started converting the spare room into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow that seemed to glow in the morning light. Her new neighbors turned out to be incredibly supportive. Mrs. Wilson from next door, a retired nurse, brought over homemade casseroles and offered to help with the nursery. 4 babies, she'd exclaim, shaking her head with a mixture of amazement and concern. "You're going to need an army of helpers, dear." The pregnancy wasn't easy. Carrying quadruplets meant frequent doctor visits and careful monitoring. Lauren found herself on the other side of medical care, being the patient instead of the doctor. Her feet swelled, her back ached, and simple tasks became increasingly challenging. But every time she saw those 4 tiny heartbeats on the ultrasound screen, her own heart swelled with joy. She joined a local support group for single mothers, finding comfort in their stories and shared experiences. None of them were expecting quadruplets, but they understood the courage it took to choose motherhood on your own terms. These weekly meetings became her sanctuary, a place where she could share her fears and hopes without judgment. One evening, as she sorted through tiny onesies donated by the support group, Lauren found herself smiling at how different her life had become. The expensive restaurants and charity galas of her Boston life seemed like a distant dream. Here, in her cozy Seattle apartment, surrounded by baby clothes and medical journals, she felt more authentic than she ever had before. The clinic was thriving beyond her expectations. She'd hired 2 other doctors and a full staff, creating a warm and welcoming environment for couples struggling with fertility. Her own experience had made her even more compassionate towards her patients. She understood their yearning for a family in a way she never had before. As her due date approached, Lauren prepared for every possible scenario. The nursery was ready, with 4 identical cribs arranged in a perfect square. 4 sets of everything lined the shelves: bottles, pacifiers, tiny hats, and booties. The support group had organized a meal train for after the babies arrived, and Mrs. Wilson had volunteered to help during the first few weeks. Looking out at the Seattle skyline one evening, Lauren felt a profound sense of peace. Yes, this wasn't the life she had planned, but sometimes the best things in life come from our broken dreams. She was building something beautiful, not just a family, but a whole new world filled with possibilities. Little did she know that her past was about to catch up with her in the most unexpected way. 4 years had passed like a beautiful blur. Lauren's mornings now started with the cheerful chaos of getting 4 energetic toddlers ready for preschool. Their matching curly hair and bright eyes made them impossible to tell apart for most people, but to her, each child was uniquely special. They had their own personalities, their own little quirks that made her smile every single day. That particular Tuesday seemed just like any other. After a busy morning at the clinic, Lauren had taken the children to their favorite restaurant, a cozy little place near Pike Place Market that made the best mac and cheese in Seattle. The kids were coloring their paper placemats while she helped them take turns with the crayons, making sure everyone got to use their favorite colors. The bell above the restaurant door chimed, but Lauren didn't look up. She was too busy wiping chocolate milk from one toddler's chin, while another proudly showed her a wobbly drawing of what might have been a cat. Or maybe it was a tree. She had learned to be enthusiastically uncertain about preschool art. "More milk, please." One of the children called out, and Lauren reached for the sippy cup. That's when she heard it, the sharp intake of breath, the sound of a briefcase dropping onto the hardwood floor. She knew that sound. She knew that presence. 4 years had passed, but some things you never forget. She looked up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. There he stood, in an expensive suit that couldn't hide how pale he'd suddenly become. Her ex-fiancé, the tech millionaire who had left her just days before their wedding, was staring at her table with an expression of complete shock. But he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the 4 identical faces that were now curiously turning to look at the stranger who had made such a loud noise. The children's features were a perfect blend of their parents, her gentle smile, his strong chin, those distinctive eyebrows that his mother had always been so proud of. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The bustling restaurant faded into background noise as their eyes finally met. She could see the wheels turning in his head, the math being done, the realization dawning in those once familiar eyes. The children, oblivious to the tension, had already lost interest and returned to their coloring. "Mommy, can we have ice cream?" one of them asked, breaking the spell. Lauren turned to her child with a warm smile, years of practice helping her keep her voice steady. "Finish your lunch first, sweetheart." When she looked back, he was gone, though his untouched briefcase still lay on the floor near the door. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. Lauren helped the kids with their food, answered their endless questions, and tried to ignore the knot forming in her stomach. She knew this day would come eventually, but she hadn't expected it to happen like this, in their favorite restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. On the drive home, she caught glimpses of her children in the rearview mirror, all 4 of them strapped safely in their car seats, singing along to their favorite cartoon songs. They were her whole world, the result of a decision made in both heartbreak and hope. She had built a beautiful life for them, full of love and laughter and sticky fingers on freshly cleaned windows. But as she tucked them into bed that night, reading their favorite story about the little train that could, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed world was about to face its biggest challenge yet. She knew him well enough to know he wouldn't let this go. The question was, what would he do with this newfound knowledge? Looking at her sleeping children, their peaceful faces illuminated by their favorite star-shaped night light, Lauren made a silent promise. Whatever storm was coming, she would protect their happiness with everything she had. These children were her miracle, her blessing, her redemption story. And no power on earth, Not even their father's millions would change that. The papers arrived on a sunny morning, delivered by a stern-faced man in a dark suit. Lauren's hands trembled as she read the legal document. Her ex-fiancé was suing for full custody of all 4 children, claiming she had used their fertility treatments without his consent. The world she had carefully built over the past 4 years seemed to be crumbling around her. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets had somehow gotten hold of the story, and everyone wanted to hear about the fertility doctor who had stolen a millionaire's genetic material. The headlines were getting more sensational by the hour. She had to turn off the TV when she saw her own clinic being filmed by news crews, her patients trying to dodge cameras as they entered the building. "Mummy, why are there people with cameras outside?" one of her little ones asked during breakfast. Lauren's heart ached as she tried to explain in simple terms that some people were just very interested in their family. She kept the children home from preschool that day, worried about the media attention. They spent the morning building pillow forts and playing board games, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. The medical board called an emergency meeting to discuss her case. Lauren sat in the conference room, facing her peers, doctors she had worked alongside for years. She explained her side of the story, showing them the documented attempts to contact him about the preserved genetic material, the legal papers they had both signed during the fertility process. Some nodded understanding, others frowned in concern. Her old friend from law school connected her with a top family court attorney. "This isn't just about custody," the attorney explained gently. "This case could set precedents for reproductive rights and medical ethics." Lauren understood the implications. Her personal story had somehow become a battlefield for bigger issues. Support came from unexpected places. Mrs. Wilson from next door organized a neighborhood watch to keep reporters away from the building. Lauren's clinic staff rallied around her, handling extra patients when she needed time for legal meetings. Her single mother's support group started an online campaign sharing stories of choosing to be single parents. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy for the children. They were too young to understand why mommy sometimes cried after they went to bed, or why they couldn't go to their favorite restaurant anymore. Lauren threw herself into their routines, making pancakes in funny shapes, reading extra bedtime stories, playing their made-up games where all 5 of them were superheroes saving the world. One evening, while helping the kids build a giant block tower, Lauren got an unexpected call. A former colleague from Boston had discovered old emails from her ex-fiancé, written just before he called off the wedding. The messages revealed his calculated plan to end their relationship after completing the fertility treatments. He had known about her dream of having children and had deliberately waited until their genetic material was preserved before leaving. The media circus grew as more details emerged. Some painted her as a calculating villain who had trapped a wealthy man, while others hailed her as a symbol of women's reproductive rights. Through it all, Lauren focused on what mattered most: 4 little souls who needed their mother to be strong. Her attorney worked tirelessly, building a case around the documented evidence. The signed consent forms, the ignored communications, the paper trail of her attempts to involve him in decisions about their stored genetic material, it all painted a very different picture from what he was claiming in court. As the first court date approached, Lauren sat in her rocking chair late one night, looking at family photos on her phone. There they were at the zoo, at the beach, celebrating birthdays and having picnics in the park. Every picture showed 4 happy, healthy children who knew they were loved. Whatever happened in court, she knew these memories were real, and no lawsuit could take them away. Little did she know, the truth about her ex-fiancé's actions was about to come to light in a way that would change everything. The next phase of their story would reveal just how far he had gone to protect his fortune, and just how wrong he had been about what really mattered in life. The courthouse buzzed with tension on the first day of the trial. Lauren straightened her simple blue dress, a gift from her support group, who thought its color represented strength. Her children were safe at home with Mrs. Wilson, probably covered in cookie crumbs and finger paint, blissfully unaware of the battle being fought over their future. Her ex-fiancé sat across the courtroom, looking exactly like the businessman he was in his $1,000 suit. He avoided eye contact, focusing instead on his expensive leather briefcase. His team of lawyers surrounded him like a protective wall, their tablets and papers spread across the table. The proceedings began with his side presenting their case. His lawyer painted a picture of a wealthy man betrayed by a calculating woman who had used his genetic material without permission. The words stung, but Lauren held her head high. She knew the truth, and soon everyone else would too. Then came the moment that changed everything. Lauren's attorney stood up, holding a stack of printed emails. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence that was recently discovered." The judge nodded, and what happened next left the courtroom in stunned silence. The emails were between her ex-fiancé and his business partner, dated just weeks before he called off the wedding. In them, he detailed his plan to end the relationship after their fertility treatments were complete. "Once the genetic material is stored, I'll break it off," he had written. "Can't risk having kids claim my fortune, but don't want to waste the opportunity either." More messages revealed his true character. He had laughed about Lauren's dream of having a family, calling it a convenient way to access his wealth. He had even joked about timing the breakup perfectly, after the fertility treatments but before the wedding. The courtroom murmured as each message was read. But the most damaging evidence came from his own assistant. She stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. She testified about shredding certified letters from Lauren's clinic, all on his direct orders. Letters that had asked for his input about the stored genetic material, letters that he had claimed he never received. During a short break, Lauren stepped into the courthouse bathroom to splash water on her face. She remembered all those nights she had spent trying to contact him, all the messages that had gone unanswered. The truth was finally coming out, but it brought no joy, only a deep sadness for what could have been. Back in the courtroom, her attorney presented more evidence. Documentation of Lauren's multiple attempts to involve him in decisions about their stored genetic material. Witnesses from the fertility clinic testified about her professionalism and ethical conduct. Former colleagues spoke about her character and dedication to helping families. The final blow came when her attorney revealed bank statements showing large transfers to a private investigator, dated 3 years ago. He had known about the children for much longer than he claimed. He had chosen to stay away, only deciding to sue when his business partners questioned his character after meeting Lauren and the children at a charity event. As the day drew to a close, Lauren thought about her 4 little ones, probably getting ready for their bedtime story. They were the best thing that had ever happened to her, even if their beginning hadn't been the fairy tale she imagined. They were living proof that sometimes life's biggest blessings come disguised as its greatest challenges. The judge called for a recess until the next day. Walking out of the courthouse, Lauren noticed her ex-fiancé's confident demeanor had crumbled. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his shoulders. Sometimes the truth has a way of stripping away even the most carefully crafted facades. And tomorrow, the final decision would change their lives forever. The morning of the final verdict dawned clear and bright. Lauren woke up early to make breakfast for her children, watching them eat their dinosaur-shaped pancakes with their usual enthusiasm. "You're extra pretty today, Mommy," one of them said, noticing her special dress. She hugged them extra tight before leaving them with Mrs. Wilson, trying to memorize every detail of their sweet faces. The courtroom was packed. News of the scandalous emails had spread, and everyone wanted to see how this modern-day drama would end. Lauren sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, while her attorney arranged papers on their table. Her ex-fiancé looked tired, the circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. She was a stern-looking woman with kind eyes, someone who had seen many family disputes in her years on the bench. She took her time reviewing her notes, while Lauren's heart thundered in her chest. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, the judge began, her voice clear and steady, "This court finds in favor of the defendant." Lauren felt tears welling up in her eyes as the judge continued, explaining how the signed agreements and documented attempts at communication legally protected her actions. But the judge wasn't finished. She looked directly at the millionaire, her expression serious. Furthermore, this court finds the plaintiff's conduct troubling. The deliberate concealment of communications and the calculated timing of this lawsuit suggest an attempt to manipulate both this court and the defendant. The judge's words echoed through the silent courtroom. The children will remain in their mother's full custody. The plaintiff's request for parental rights is denied based on his demonstrated lack of interest in the children's welfare over the past 4 years. Lauren's attorney squeezed her hand as tears of relief rolled down her cheeks. Across the room, her ex-fiancé slumped in his chair, his expensive suit no longer looking quite so pristine. His carefully crafted image had crumbled under the weight of his own actions. Outside the courthouse, supporters cheered. The single mothers group that had stood by her through everything was there, holding handmade signs celebrating justice. Mrs. Wilson called to say the children were making welcome home cards for their mommy, complete with lots of glitter and stickers. The media coverage shifted dramatically. Instead of scandalous headlines, stories now focused on a mother's courage and determination. Lauren's clinic saw an increase in patients, many saying they were inspired by her strength. Letters poured in from people around the world, sharing their own stories of choosing single parenthood. That evening, Lauren celebrated with a pizza party at home. The children bounced around in their pajamas, more excited about the extra toppings than the court victory they didn't understand. As she watched them play, she realized that sometimes the best families aren't the ones we plan for, but the ones that life surprises us with. A week later, an unexpected letter arrived. Her ex-fiancé had written a personal apology, acknowledging his mistakes and the pain he'd caused. He didn't ask for forgiveness or access to the children. It was simply an admission of his wrongs. Lauren tucked the letter away, knowing that someday her children might want to understand their story. As months passed, life settled into a new normal. The media attention faded, and Lauren's clinic continued to help other families achieve their dreams of having children. She started a foundation to support single parents by choice, turning her experience into a way to help others. The children grew and thrived, filling their home with laughter, chaos, and love. They asked questions about their story sometimes, and Lauren answered honestly, always emphasizing how wanted and loved they were. Their family might not look like others, but it was perfect in its own way. Looking back, Lauren realized that what had seemed like the end of her dreams had actually been the beginning of something even more beautiful. Her children weren't just her happiness. They were her victory, her redemption, and her proof that sometimes the best things in life come from following your heart, even when the path isn't easy. And in the end, that's what really mattered, not the millions in the bank, not the society headlines, but the simple joy of 4 pairs of little arms hugging her goodnight, and the knowledge that she had fought for and won the only thing that truly mattered: a family built on love.